Is Ukraine doubling down on its most successful axes of advance? But is Russia already counterattacking? What does it mean for Ukraine's counteroffensive? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's June 14th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first and foremost, let's take a look at the major changes we have from yesterday. Is significantly first in the south, you can see that there's some level of confirmation that the Marakivka has been liberated by Ukrainian forces. You can see Russia launching a small counterattack attempting to take back Marakivka, but it looks like Ukrainian forces have held. But you can see here that this front along Novodonetsky, Russian forces have actually looked to have made some level of counterattack. And here we go from the 13th, or the morning to the afternoon. So you can see that Russian forces, again, pushing into Marakivka, but in a way sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, because they end up losing some level of territory here, even as it's a strange thing. It's almost like they carve out the center and try to push Ukrainian forces back near Novodonetsk and in Marakivka, but it doesn't look like it's achieved any considerable objectives. You can see Ukrainian forces, again, probably positioned along this river here, and while this is listed as contested, they still probably occupy this river. So I think in practical terms, there's not a huge change. And the fact that Russia is using its very limited resources to launch these counterattacks is probably a net good for Ukraine, since it's simply much easier to inflict losses on your enemy when you have them out of their trenches and on the offensive. What's also interesting is that near Bakhmut, we can see that actually there has been considerable progress near Klachivka. Again, not anything sterling or really exceptional, but this, I think it's noteworthy that this forested area, again, around maybe 600 meters of forest, Russian forces have been kicked out. But you can see what's the problem for them now is that this remaining area that is either contested or not occupied, this is actually really vulnerable, because as you can see, where could they build defensive positions? This linear windbreak really is only suitable for forces attacking from the east. If you attack from the north, you can see there's not really a strong defensive area. Russia would instead have to rely on something like this forested area here. So you can see that think of these things as natural defensive lines that are going to be harder to break. If we view it that way, you can see that in a sense, outside of Klachivka, this large forested line is more or less cleared, and they can push across some of these fields, and they'll be engaging Russian forces in these forested areas now before they get to the main town of Klachivka. You can see Klachivka is, of course, a stepping stone on the way to encircling Bakhmut, which I think is part of the larger objective here. And you can see, again, that Ukraine's effort to de-encircle Bakhmut is still continuing. Right? Ukraine's still putting combat power into that. But what's interesting, when we go over to the Institute for the Study of War, we can see that they discuss some of the other changes. But I wanted to real quick talk about the Strategic Sitrep. This is a newsletter I launched earlier this month. We are almost at 5,000 subscribers, and you can subscribe for free. And all it is a once-a-week email containing the most essential national security news, where we provide you not just the news report itself in an unbiased, non-clickbait way, but we also give you a so what. What does it mean? Why is this story important? And this is something that I think is really missing in the national security space, that there's not just these news stories but oftentimes they're spun in a clickbaity, almost inaccurate way, and they almost never give you the context you need to understand it. So if you are interested in hearing about this and signing up, you can go to the strategicsitrep.com, sign up for free, or the link is in the description. Okay, Institute for the Study of War made some interesting points. First off, Ukraine claims to have liberated around 100 square kilometers of territory since the beginning of the counteroffensive. And this has been confirmed by none other than Prigozhin himself, who said June 13th he assesses Ukrainian forces have liberated more than 100 square kilometers. Interesting. But what's even more interesting is that Russian sources are saying that Ukrainian forces are continuing ground assaults in Kyiv, but other Russian sources are saying that the tempo of Ukrainian operations in the Kyiv area has declined in recent days. And I think that actually the second one of these is true. I think Kyiv has experienced a decline because, as we talked about in previous videos, what you have along the Eastern Front is Ukraine seems to be doing this very Russian style, Soviet style of probing attacks. They launch across the front line in several axes, probing to find where the enemy is weak. And when they achieve a breakthrough, where they find a favorable terrain, a commander who's poorly planned, a ill-trained unit, and they start to see breakthroughs, they're going to stop the heaviest fighting in those other axes, and they're going to commit those troops to facilitating and exploiting a breakthrough in those areas. Now, I want to point out that, as we've discussed in other videos, the real hard nut to crack for Ukraine is actually approaching now at Staromayorsk, right? This line here between south of Novodonetsk to Staromayorsk to Rivnopil, this is where Russia has built its first major defensive line. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm not even correct. They have another 4 or 5 kilometers to go. It's at Karamensk, Staromilnivka. How could I confuse those two? And Remivka. This line is their main defensive line, their first main defensive line. And this is where Ukraine is really going to have its work cut out for it. So it still has a considerable fight ahead of it before it even gets to this first major defensive line. And I think this is going to take more of these brigades are going to have to work and seriously try to grind out Russian forces in this area. But it makes sense that they would pivot away from Kyiv and divert some of their forces to supporting this effort that appears to be achieving some level of success. When we look at the combat map, you can see there's actually not been any updated reports on offensive actions by either party. The only kind of noteworthy note is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is visiting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, delaying its visit to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant until they can verify that it is safe to travel. But I think it's worth noting that, again, the Zaporizhzhia power plant does not appear to be in any imminent danger. Even with the changing water levels, they would simply shut down the reactors as these water levels drop below certain levels. So I don't think there's any substantial danger. As always, guys, thank you to everybody for watching. Thank you especially to our Colonel tier members of combatvetnews.com and our Lieutenant tier members. I really appreciate each and every one of you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.